I think what's kind of taking us all back is just the amount of the overall overspend looking at last year's budget. So I would like to start with the medical assistance workers with disabilities line item that was enacted last year at $52 million, and now we're looking at a $12 million supplemental overspend, 23%. When I look at budgets, I look for kind of numbers that stand out. 23% increase is a fairly substantial increase. So it's a total spend this year of $64 million. Specifically, what is driving this up, and or what are we doing to curb any of these costs?
So, I mean, when you say overspend, I mean, I think just to be clear from our perspective, as I mentioned before, again, I mean, we are an agency that administers a lot of entitlement programs. So if people meet the eligibility criteria, our mission and our obligation is to provide those services. So for the MOD program, we're seeing more people eligible for that program. Just like in, for example, our CHC program, we're seeing many more people eligible for that program. So I know you call it overspend. I think from our perspective, we're here to meet those needs, and it's our requirement to do that.
Did we not see any of these trends coming last year when we drafted the budget?
Well, I think one thing to note when we talk about our supplemental, and again, so we sign contracts with our managed care organizations. If we're talking about our managed care programs, whether that's physical health, behavioral health, or CHC, we sign contracts every year with our managed care organizations to pay actuarially sound rates. And we estimate what kind of services and how many services we're going to provide. But I think there is a general acknowledgement that we're not going to hit that right every time, right? That's why we have a February budget, and it's why we have a spring update, because things change.
Oh, yeah, I totally get that. I mean, I understand that there's going to be some adjustments. I think we're looking at trends is what I'm talking about. I mean, one of the things you talked about was the aging population. Mm-hmm. Did we not see that coming when we drafted some of these numbers last year?
Well, I think the other thing to note is, again, I mentioned that we sign contracts, we provide a budget, and then the legislature appropriates funding that may or may not cover all of the needs that we have put out there. And so at the end of the day, in capitation, we don't have waiting lists. So if people are eligible, we provide those services. So in some cases, yes, we did see it, but again, the legislature decides what they're going to appropriate for the agency.
Okay. Another line item that I'd like to talk about is the medical assistance long-term living line item. It was enacted at $491 million. The request for supplemental appropriations is $46 million. Again, that's about a 9.5 increase. Total appropriation would be $537 million. Specifically, what are we looking at there for the supplemental?
Yeah.
So again, I mean, we have an aging population. These are people who, in many cases, have paid into the system their entire lives, and they are outliving their resources, and they need services, and so we're here to provide those services. But I do think this is a really important question. I'm glad you asked it, because I do think as we move forward, this is going to be a bigger and bigger issue for our budget. We really are not, as a society, frankly, and this is not just a Pennsylvania issue, we are not prepared for all of our parents and grandparents to continue outliving their resources, and Medicaid is bearing the brunt of those costs.
Totally agree with you. So looking at trends going forward, is that something you're prepared to give us some numbers on this year as we draft the budget that would be maybe a little more in line with where we think we're going to be at the end of the year, next year?
We can certainly, we'll do it a spring update. We'll give them newer numbers.
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, we typically, we call it spring update, but in a couple of months, we'll be giving updated numbers as we have better feel for what the actuals will be for this year. So we'll be providing those to you. I believe about May is when we provide those.
I will say one just point of note, which we thought was very interesting. And again, I don't think we anticipated this level of growth. But in the last year, when you look at the increase in enrollment for LTSS services in the community, that has gone up 10% just in the last year. So those are the kinds of growth numbers we're seeing.
And lastly, the medical assistance home and community-based services line item. Last year, we appropriated it at $159 million. Request for supplemental is $32 million, another 20% increase. Total appropriation of $191 million. Specifically, what are we looking at in that line item?
think I anticipated your question. This is exactly where we're seeing that growth. So in just the last year, we saw a 10% increase in our enrollment in long-term services and supports in the community. So that is a very big driver. The good news is we want people to receive those services in the community because it's cheaper than receiving them in a nursing facility.
Yeah.
And I think this is where our Community Health Choices program has been a real success story because we just finished the third rollout, but we are starting to see that program moving to managed care has changed where people are getting served. So we are serving more people in the community now, which is a good thing. But again, there's just a lot of seniors that we have to serve, and it costs a lot of money.
I appreciate the work that you're doing, and we want to draft a budget that's accurate. So any additional information you can help us with trends, with actual numbers, so that we're not coming back and looking for a $500 million supplemental. That's a tough one. So if any additional information you can provide to the committee would be very helpful.